If you boil dogs alive and you pay children $1.25 or $3.25 a day, if you allow women to be beaten or they require 4 witnesses for rape, you, we don't need to listen to you. You don't get a seat at the international bargaining table. Let's talk about this right now. Everything wrong with China, and not just as a part of this pandemic right now. Right. But I think if nothing else, this has sort of lifted the veil for a lot of people to realize, like, hey, as far as international trade goes, as far as the agreements, they're not necessarily our friends in every country. Doesn't mean they're necessarily enemies. I don't want to be you should be American, buy American. I mean, have you driven a Volt?
That's a good point.
I don't even know that they have.
Force that on
I don't even know that they have a AAA in Japan. You just call a guy and he shows up. Buy a Toyota. Okay. Oh, no, not a mechanic. Salesman. He's on my card. So, point is, now that I said that, we can dump on China. So listen, Donald Trump has been trying to sound the alarm, particularly as it relates to international trade on China, for quite some time.
I'd like to have you take a look at the fentanyl that's coming out of China and Mexico.
Major Chinese drug traffickers and they have really put very, very strong clamps on them. They've indicted them when
Cuomo
they
said
charge
nipple clamps
25% for a car to go in, and we charge 2% for their car to come into the United States. That's not good. We've taxed China on $300 billion worth of goods and products being sold into our country. He said he was going to stop fentanyl from coming into our country. It's all coming out of China.
Now, here's the thing, and I've talked about this, I don't like the idea of tariffs because it's a tax passed on to the consumer. However, there is a valid point when you do have countries, and it's no longer equitable. If they are taxing our goods going over, right? Because as moral libertarians, we agree, like, listen, we shouldn't be just putting a tariff on to punish a country, but if they are punishing us, there really isn't a fair international trade agreement. And I think, and no one, by the way, Bernie Sanders talked about this, the Clintons talked about this a long time ago. I know NAFTA, we can go into Bill Clinton, but if you listen to Hillary Clinton's rhetoric, but certainly Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump's the first person to do anything as it relates to trade. That's not what we're talking about today, but it has sort of fostered an environment with this festering pustule that has become the Chinese Communist government. China this week, they reopened the wet markets that were allegedly the source of all this. And by the way, they're still selling bats, dogs, and cats. And I want to be clear, and I tried to be really careful, by the way. I want to warn you, we're not showing anything graphic as far as videos, but to me it's still disturbing. It's really hard for me to do any of the animal stuff. So let me describe it for you and then tell you you're not going to see anything other than dogs in cages at the market. Okay, wet markets, allegedly, from what we understand, created the virus. And now, while the rest of the world is still going through the pandemic, they reinstated them. To understand the severity of that, imagine the United States removing all the social distancing guidelines and then banning soap. That's how severe bringing back the wet markets can be. No hygiene standards. The cruelty, though, is it's over the top. Dogs are kept in cramped cages, and then, I'm not going to show it, but then they're boiled alive. I want to warn you, it's not graphic, but the following footage will make you angry. We had to cut it short because that's all we can show
there was more.
without you guys getting super, super pissed.
Now, Bill, what does wet market mean? I don't mean to ask you specifically.
Well, it's interesting.
You do mean precisely to ask him specifically.
I think you do, and you're asking the Asian half, so it'll be a good answer.
So I'll get it accurate.
So what people have always understood wet markets to be, and what they've always been described as, is the wet refers to the blood. People are going to be skinning the animals alive or butchering them live on the street in front of the customers, and like wet work, a military term, assassinations, that type of thing, it refers to the blood that's involved. But now, actually, people are trying to swing the other way to try to counter the racism of just the facts of the situation of how these wet markets exist. There was an LA Times article came out either today or yesterday that tried to say, well, it's not actually referring to the blood and the butchering, it's just referring to the fact that they hose the ground off and the ground is wet.
Question.
So the ground is now wet with the blood of the animals that were killed alive, because apparently that makes them more delicious.
Yes. Lest you think that these wet markets exist in the countryside, because you think, it's got to be removed. No, the Wuhan area where these wet markets, it's a 15 million person city center. It's like putting it in downtown New York, right? It's around everybody that's packed together. So it's not like an isolated thing out in the country you can go to.
No, and just so you know the numbers, I mean, it's tens of thousands of markets.
Oh,
of
yeah.
wet markets.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, at its peak before they started shutting them all down, which was not long ago, months ago, we're talking about, there were tens of thousands of these markets. And even in, not just in the quote unquote rural provinces, which is a good point, Gerald. I mean, these are multiple million person cities.
Yeah.
But even in Shanghai or Beijing or in the suburbs around those towns, they have those wet markets. And, you know, it's not just the idea of a butcher, right? Like we have butchers here and maybe they do live butchering, but it's the proximity of wild animals all together combined with the hygiene and the mixing that creates the huge problem that we have here.
Yeah. So let's go through a few points here that I think matter in relation to China. And half Asian Bill, you can half correct me wherever I'm wrong.
But only half.
The wet markets, they're not only where coronavirus started, also SARS.
Yeah.
Let's be clear about that. And those are just the diseases that originated specifically in the wet market. So not all, but many different strains of bird flu, swine flu, they spread in these markets. They weren't created necessarily in these markets, but this is where they spread, and they led to repeated outbreaks. They've shut down these markets they shut them down during the SARS outbreak, during the H7N9, which I don't necessarily remember. It was that's right. It's a bird flu.
We knew about bird flu.
That's right. We knew about bird flu. That was a pandemic, I heard.
It was.
And now coronavirus. So what's most important to me is they shut them down, right? So this disease spreads. They shut down the wet markets like right away. Everyone shut down wet market. Okay, and then they reopen them, so they know that it's happening there. And right now, it's extra dickish because the pandemic is still spreading across the globe, and they are already reopening them. Like, can't you wait until the bodies have assumed room temperature in Italy and Spain and the United States before you reopen what you knowingly had created as an incubator to create the proliferation of this disease? Let's go down to some other dangerous things that have been going. The research. Okay, so if the wet markets weren't bad enough, Chinese government, they've been conducting all kinds of viral research.
Oh, yeah.
Right, they isolated and worked with over 2,000. I want to make sure, over 2,000 new viruses, including bat coronaviruses, just 3 miles from the Wuhan market. And you were saying actually some of them are 1.2 kilometers.
It was 1.2 kilometers away. Washington Times put up there that it was 3, but I actually just Google Earthed it. But the Chinese government or somebody removed from Google the listing of where that
That's
is.
interesting. I would like to know why there's that discrepancy.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's the way of the bird.
No. So 1.2 kilometers
faster?
walking.
Really?
Walking. You can look it up right now.
Well, I don't want to look it up right now.
I'm just saying, like, the people at home can look it up
I'll trust
right now.
you over Washington Times.
You should definitely do that.
But to give you an idea, when people say they're researching viruses, deadly viruses, call it 3 miles to be generous.
Yeah.
If it's 1.2 kilometers, that's about half a mile.
That's close.
That's crazy.
That'd be like growing organic turnips next to Area 51.
Yeah, that's not a good idea.
It's not a good idea, no
That's how
matter.
you get alien turnips.
And this isn't a race thing, it's a bad idea thing.
Yeah.
Don't study deadly viruses next to where people eat live things.
Yeah.
This is important. We're not just pointing out cruelty because we don't like it. No, cruelty actually does have a dramatic effect on the health of these animals and the immune system. Like people want to talk about factory farming in the United States. That's why they have to inject them with all kinds of antibiotics because they're close proximity. Your dog is filthy enough. They lick their crotch and then try and lick your face. Like, I get it. And kind of when it's your own dog, most people are fine with it. I understand. But that's not what's happening with these dogs. When you put them in a cage and they're basically being abused their entire lives, they are going to be more fertile carriers for disease. And to give you, just so you know, this isn't necessarily, and I think everything that you've all said here is reasonable. And now I'm starting to think, yeah, biological warfare. But I would never claim that. But in 2013,
we wouldn't say that.
Chinese researchers, they created a mutated strain of the bird flu in their attempts to make, this is quote, attempts to make strains in a lab that would, if accidentally released or used for nefarious purposes, pose a potentially global health threat. Now, I'm saying they were just saying it's a possibility. They weren't like playing it coy like, oh, whoopsie, gate go up, bird flu for you.
Yeah.
They were just saying that, hey, if this were to happen, it would be really bad.
Yeah.
And they were acknowledging that we're doing all of these things that hopefully this, like, have you seen Jurassic Park 1 through 5? Rife finds a way. By the way, hit the notification bell if you are not subscribed or not joining Mug Club despite Mug Club quarantine month. Hit all notifications.
Yeah.
And, of course, subscribe to Crowder Bits. We have new videos that go up every night at 9 p.m. Eastern anyway here on YouTube. So there's always a clip on YouTube. You just don't get the full show. Here's another thing that I think is pretty important when we're talking about China. And because the media is not doing it, they're carrying their water. I'll tell you why. I think the media are communist sympathizers. I'm not going to walk that back at all right now.
No.
But I'll circle back to that because unless you shut it off, I just did advertise colloidal silver and say that they were commies. Let's get to the masks, the test kits, the equipment, right? Here's the thing. They've not been honest. We now know this when it comes to medical testing, right? With the coronavirus. Now everyone is acknowledging that. We were throttled on YouTube for saying you cannot trust the numbers coming out of China right now. We didn't say that they are flat out wrong, but you can't trust them yet. And of course, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, they decided to redirect all of these kinds of statements to more authoritative sources, some of which were directly from the Chinese Communist government. We'll come back to that. By the way, Donald Trump said, we're not taking the masks. Everyone gave him crap for it. The Netherlands, they had to recall 600,000 faulty masks from China. The latest test kits from Spain, they only work 30% of the time. Same for the kits, Turkey. Yeah, country after they are scrambling to try and dump some of these bad Chinese products that are destroying the chances of taking the coronavirus out or at least containing it. Here, think about this for a second. Take all of the numbers from these countries and then add potentially 30%.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the infection rates. We're the only country that doesn't have that right now. We have more accurate testing right now. And now we're doing more and more testing by the day. The fact, I was shocked. I had to double check this and have read your research. A 30% failure rate? You might not even take that test.
That's insane.
Would you use a condom with a 30% failure rate?
Yeah. That's a high
only works
margin
30% of the time. That's what he's saying. So it's a 70% failure rate is what they had.
Oh, they only work.
It's the other way. They only work 30% of the time.
The problem is I'm so anti-Chinese I can't do math.
Well, no, that would be bad enough. If it had a 30% failure rate, we'd be up in arms. It was 70% failure rate.
70%.
And the Chinese government in Spain, basically, the embassy said, well, they weren't licensed to make the product, so our bad.
Yeah.
So that was their defense of the entire thing.
Also, the baby food, asbestos. Might want to avoid that for a while. The Best By date, not really relevant. It's all bad. They do have a history, by the way, of sometimes China exporting goods that I was making a joke about, that poisonous toothpaste, that toxic children's toys, unsafe tires, all of which had to be recalled. Now, I want to be really clear. Not all Chinese goods are bad, and not all American goods are good. So, and by the way, if there's an American manufacturer out there who can actually create a quality mug for us, we would love to work with you. It just has to be at a reasonable rate and decent quality. At that time, we could only find American Union-made mugs, and it was more expensive. So we said, we'll bring it in from a company that chemically tests their products. And now we have Americans who are etching it and painting it, so it created more jobs. But if there is an American manufacturer who can make this kind of a mug, we would love to partner with you. And if you want a big old fat contract amidst this pandemic, there are a lot of new mug club signups, so thank all of you. I pray to God, and I mean it, that we see an armed insurrection from the Chinese people against those commie bastards at some point in our lifetime.
They got to overthrow them eventually.
Are you encouraging violence for the people who are being held hostage, or the people who've all of a sudden disappeared? Whistleblowers, right? Several doctors now. One tried to blow the whistle on the masks. She's gone. Yeah, I think some people need to defend themselves right now. I think people need to rise up, and hopefully the international community, rather than being paralyzed by political correctness, will say, you know what? These people, not the government, these people deserve the same rights that we have in France, in Spain, in Italy, in the United States. So you know what, Chinese government, because we sympathize with your people, off. How about that? At some point,
I would like to hear
we need to do that. I'd love to hear that press conference. Here's another point. Fentanyl. Is it fentanyl or fentanyl?
Fentanyl.
I have no idea. Well, then,
both.
Okay, because
I'll ask my wife.
I thought it was what the president said, fentanyl, and I was like, oh, he's the president. I must be wrong. Then I realized, not exactly. So,
don't use that as a gauge.
The rate of fentanyl-related deaths has been doubling every year. Now almost 20,000 dying each year. Main destination for fentanyl, the United States. Main source of fentanyl, China. Now I know what you're thinking, and this is a valid point. You have Americans who make meth or synthesize opioids. That's absolutely true. But those people are not creating drugs that are effectively sanctioned or actually subsidized by the government and given tax breaks on exports, as you see in China. No, that actually happens. For context, just imagine Joe Exotic receiving a federal grant for a gay meth tattoo parlor tiger den. That's what's happening.
Season 2.
It's not that they're the only country with drugs. That's not my issue.
Yeah.
It's the government actually subsidizing and giving tax breaks on fentanyl as an export. Fortunately, President Trump, on all of these points, but particularly fentanyl, as he pronounced it, he's been pretty consistent, and I wish that more people listened on all of these points.
They tax our goods going into China. It's a totally unfair deal.
We've taxed China on $300 billion worth of goods and products being sold into our country.
The Chinese virus, it comes from China.
Yeah. Think about it for a second. Why were Washington Post, New York Times, Vox all saying the flu is something you should worry? The coronavirus is not an issue. Don't worry about it. Now they try and act like it's a left-right thing. No, you guys said not to worry about it because at that point you were parroting the World Health Organization talking points, who, by the way, were parroting the Chinese government talking points. Then, all of a sudden, when it was blamed on the United States that we weren't ready because we were trusting information from China, and a Chinese foreign minister, who, by the way, was not throttled or censored by Twitter at all, but Laura Ingraham was, for saying that the masks were faulty, which is true. Actually, no, she was censored because of the chloroquine thing. I think I was censored for saying the masks were faulty.
It's
all so shitty. The issue, what was I saying before that? What was I talking about before that? Oh, yeah.
So the foreign minister.
Again, the quickest, Occam's razor here. Why would they say it's not a big deal? And then all of a sudden say it's a big deal and the right is wrong about it. For the same reason that they don't seem to have a problem with doctors and whistleblowers disappearing in China, and they refuse to run the press briefings here in the United States from the White House. Here's a new rule. While we're talking about freedom of the press, you know what? It's not exactly communist China here if CNN refuses to run the press briefing and instead runs commentary on the press briefing, that you don't get a seat or a press badge. How about that? How about once you stop parroting communist Chinese talking points, then maybe you get a seat at that table. It is remarkable to me that I can't think of any other time in American history, but Orange Man bad, that we have a president, commander-in-chief, who's going out there addressing the people directly. The president of the United States and the media is opting not to run it. Instead, running false propaganda that maybe they're not getting from the Chinese government, but it certainly would be congruent with the messages that the Chinese government is trying to put out there right now. When you look at reporters retweeting the foreign minister with conspiracy theories, for some reason they're still on there, but Alex Jones is not. This is the president of the, and something else that's remarkable, they go, oh, potentially 100,000 to 220,000 deaths from coronavirus. You know where you got those numbers? From Donald Trump's press briefing, dummy! But you didn't run it because you didn't want to include that we're getting hundreds of thousands of new masks. We're getting hundreds of thousands of masks that can be sanitized. The FDA approved the therapeutics that Donald Trump touted and you said he was wrong and crazy about. So what do? They don't run the press briefing. Instead, they run commentary on the press briefing while the Cuomos talk about their mom's pasta sauce and nipple rings. And then they take the worst numbers from the press briefings and don't actually tell Americans about the positives. Listen, not all cultures are created equal. And Donald Trump is right about this, just like Bernie Sanders was right about this. Americans should not have to compete with the child at a Nike factory who's working for $1.50 a day. This is not, we can't be in an international economy if it's not fair. And you know what? When we're talking about this, not all cultures are created equal, because I think that American exceptionalism is a good thing. And you know, if you boil dogs alive and you pay children $1.25 or $3.25 a day, guess what? You don't get a seat at the international bargaining table. And not just China, because not all cultures are equal. If you don't let your women drive, you don't get to sit and dictate any policy or even express your opinion here in the United States. If you allow women to be beaten or they require 4 witnesses for rape, you, we don't need to listen to you. We're not going to be on any committee or international agreement that you take part in. So let's start with China and then work our way down so that hopefully we can be the empire we've been accused of being and make the rest of the world the United States of America. Why? Because the Chinese and everyone else would be better off. I know I got a little worked up there, but there are videos playing in boxes here. So click those if you want to see more content. Hit the subscription button or hit the notification bell. Hit all notifications so you'll know when new videos come out. But hint, every weeknight at 9 p.m. Eastern, you can come in and see a video. And I just want to clarify, I know I got passionate, lest it be misconstrued as racist. I do not have a problem in any way with the Chinese people. It's just the hats.